Hey, hello, this is Pravin. Welcome to .NET.Gurukul.com for the SQL Server training. Today we are in Module 1, Introduction to Databases, and Session 5, Database Normalization Part 2. Like in terms of this particular Part 1, we already covered first normalization, second normalization, third normalization. Okay, I'm going to recap you on this on a high level. And later we'll see Boycott Normal Form, like which is nothing but the BCNF, okay, and the fourth normal form. Each each normal form comes one by one. Okay, so after apply the first normal form only, we can apply the second normal form to the table. And after the second normal form, only apply the third normal form. After third normal form, you have something called as BCNF, okay, Boycott Normal Form, which I can call as 3.5 normal form, okay, which come before the fourth normal form. So I can call this as the 3.5 BCN normal form. Okay. So we'll try in this particular session, we'll try to understand the BCNF, nothing but the Boycott normal form. And later we'll see fourth normal form. Okay. So let's get understand this BCNF. BCNF removes the functional dependency. Okay. And the fourth normal form will remove the multi-value dependency. So you need to understand the functional dependency and the multi-value dependency so that we'll apply the particular tables. Okay, so let's get started. So before jumping into the 3.5 normal form or Boycott normal form, just I wanted to recap you on this particular previous session. Okay, so here if you can see that this is the previous slide session, right? So here is our unnormalized table, right? So this is like the student ID, student name, and the courses, and the instructor phone numbers. Okay, simple. This is a simple unnormalized table. And if you can see this particular table, this particular courses will have this particular multi-valued attributes. Okay, a single column having multi-valued attributes, or I can say that single column has the comma separated values. And the first normalization tells you that particular single column cannot have multi-valued attributes. Okay, so for that, what I did is like we split this particular multi-valued attributes to the individual rows. Okay, so what I did is one Ravi SQL. Okay, one Ravi SQL in one particular row, and C# in another row, and Angular in another row. Okay, so I just divided this particular multi-valued attributes to individual rows. Okay, and later, like if you can see, identify this particular, if you can see this particular table, okay, it is free from the first normalization form, but it still have some other issues also, which is nothing but the partial dependency. Okay, so if you can see this particular table and you identify the primary key, so student ID and the course will become the primary key. So the student ID and your course will be the primary key, which is nothing but one SQL, okay, one C#, one Angular, two SQL, three SQL. The combination of student ID and the course will become the composite primary key. Okay, so there is no duplicates, and it can directly identify the instructor and the instructor phone number. So as per the second normalization says that there should be no partial dependency. Okay, if student ID and the course defines the composite primary key, it should determine all other columns. So, but the problem is like student ID just without the help of customer, like in course, it can directly determines the student name. So which is the issue over here, which is nothing but the partial dependency. A part of the composite primary key should not define the other column. Okay, so that's I call that with respect to the partial dependency. So what I did is like I divided this particular table into two tables. Okay, student ID and the student name in one particular table, which is nothing part of the composite primary key. I just pulled out into another table, and this composite primary key which defines the instructor and the instructor phone number, I divided this into another table. So if you can see student ID and the student name, okay, student ID and the course, instructor and instructor phone number. So this is like the applying the second normal form, we got this particular result. Okay, so after you see this particular two tables, there is no issues with the first table. Okay, student ID and the student name, where there is no issues with respect to this table, and there is no duplicates, and there is no other issues with respect to the students table. But if you can see this particular course, student courses table, like the second table, it has the transient dependency. Okay, so with respect to the composite primary key, with respect to student ID and the course, I find the instructor, and the instructor should go and find the instructor phone number. Okay, so A is determining B and B is determining C. So that is nothing but the transient dependency. So there should be no transient dependency with respect to the third normal form. So what I will do is like I'm going to split this four columns into two tables. Okay. So this particular table, this particular three table with respect to this particular second table, I'm just splitting that into two different tables. Okay. Student ID, course, and instructor in one particular table, instructor and the phone number into another table. Okay. If you can see student, okay, student courses, student ID, and the course in one particular table, student ID, course, and the instructor, and the phone number in another table. Okay. So this is the result set we got a single unnormalized table after applying the third normal form. Okay. So till here you should be very clear. Okay. So without understanding this, don't jump into the BCNF directly. Okay. So if you can see that the student table do not have any problem, instructor table do not have any problem. So like I need to identify the issues with respect to the student courses here. Okay. Which has the functional dependency. Okay, so we'll try to understand this functional dependency in the BCNF and fourth normal form with respect to the multi-value dependency. Okay, so let's get started with respect to our this session. Okay, now let's understand the BCNF. So in this particular thing, what I just pulled out the particular table over here. So whichever the table we got with respect to the third normal form in the previous session. Okay, I pulled out this particular table. Okay, so I pulled out this particular table over here in this particular to apply the BCNF. Okay, so in terms of the data set, like I slightly modified with respect to the data set, like in terms of this particular BCNF and the fourth normal form. So we add some columns to that particular existing table, like hobby, so that it will be suitable with respect to your BCNF and the fourth normal form. So coming back to this particular data set, like if you can see the student courses, okay. So this particular student courses, like student ID, and the course is the composite primary key which defines the instructor. Okay, so this is the composite primary key which it defines the instructor. But if you can see here the example here, student ID and the course, which is the composite primary key which determines the instructor. So this looks very correct only, but with respect to the business roles, so it doesn't suits with respect to the real world demonstration. Okay, student ID has a student that has nothing to do with respect to the instructor. Okay, the course determines the instructor. Okay, if you can understand here, like if the student if I'm an instructor, I don't matter who is the student are, right? For me it matters the course. I'm talking with respect to the business roles. Okay, so as per the business roles, course should determine the instructor, not the student ID. Okay, the combination of student ID and the course might be uh, suitable with respect to the third normal form, but like here in with respect to the BCNF or 3.5 normal form, so course alone determines the instructor. Okay, so here for the business role, the course alone it defines the instructor, but here the course is not a key. So course is not a key, which is non-key attribute column. Okay, a non-key column should never define another column. So that's I call this as the functional dependency. Okay, so I can see here like what is the BCNF. BCF in advanced version of the third normal form. It removes the functional dependencies where non-key columns determines the other columns. So never a non-key column should not define the another column. So what I did is like I split this particular table into two different tables. Okay, so student ID and the course in one particular table, and the course and the instructor into another table. So as simple as like in terms of understanding the BCNF. So we slightly understand the data. So I understand the rule. So and like we understand, like in terms of the business rules, the course should define the instructor, but we doesn't need the student ID. In that particular case, like what I will do is like I'll put all this particular student data in one particular table and the course and the instructor in another table. I separate these entities. Okay. Student ID is taking one particular SQL course. Okay, he is taking multiple courses, and this particular instructor having courses and this particular instructor name. Okay, as simple as like that. Okay, so Boyce-Codd normal forms, it removes the functional dependency. So we have to keep that into mind, like feed that into your mind. So removing the functional dependency, what is functional dependency? where non-key columns keys, like non-key columns should not define another column values. Okay. So that's the functional dependency. Okay. So once you apply this particular rule, I can split this particular table into multiple tables. Okay. In two different tables. Okay. Let's understand the fourth normal form. I hope you understand the Boyce-Codd normal form. Okay. So just remember the functional dependency. Okay. So fourth normal form. Fourth normal form is higher level of normalization to remove the multi-valued dependency from a table. So let's understand the multi-valued dependency from a table. So what I did is in this particular course hobby, I just added this particular hobby column in this particular table. Okay, student ID and the student course and the hobby. So with respect to the previous table, like student ID and the student course, like I added the new column hobby. Okay, so like in terms of this particular table. So if you can understand this particular table, okay, it has the multi-value dependency. What is mean by multi-value dependency? See, if you can see that particular student is taking two courses, okay, and he has two hobbies, okay. So just because of his taking multiple courses, the cricket and music, his two hobbies are being repeated. Okay, if you can see, just because he's taking multiple courses, that particular hobby and cricket and the music is being repeated for multiple rows. Okay, so I call this as the multi-valued dependency from a table. So the fourth normal form, we remove the multi-valued dependency from the particular table by splitting this particular tables. Okay, so what I did is like I student ID in one student ID and the course in one particular table, and this particular course student ID and the hobby in another table, so that there is no multi-valued dependency. Okay, if you can see, understand this particular table and the table data, you have this particular student ID, single student table is taking multiple courses and it has the two hobbies. Okay, just because he's taking these multiple courses, the hobbies are getting repeated. So what I call this as the multi-value dependency. Okay, so based on this particular fourth normal form, there should be no multi-value dependency, and we remove the multi-value dependency by splitting that particular table. One particular table, student ID and the course, and student ID in hobby into another table. Okay, so that there will be no multi-value dependency. Okay, so I hope you understand with respect to the BCNF and the fourth normal form. So BCNF will remove the functional dependency. So it is very simple, like where non-key column determines the other columns. So this you may have to keep in mind. So you may doesn't understand the business rule, so but you try to understand the business rule also. Okay, so the course will define the instructor. Okay, not the student ID in the course has an instructor, but that the course defines the instructor in the real world business use case. Okay, so which is not a key. Okay, so that non-key values, non-key column should never define the column values. So that's the rule for the PCN, and we remove the functional dependency by splitting this particular into two different tables. Okay, student ID and course in one particular table, and course and the instructor in another table. I call this as the BCNF. Okay. So the fourth normal form, what I did is like I take another to demonstrate the multi-valued dependency. I took another column hobby, okay, and explain you the data over here. If you can understand the data over here, like in terms of this particular thing. So since the same student is taking the multiple courses, the hobbies of the two hobbies, cricket and the music, is given repeated. So I call this as the multi-value dependency. Okay, so keep in your mind with respect to multi-value dependency, and I split this particular tables into two different tables. Okay, I hope you understand with respect to the complete database normalization, like in terms of the first normalization, second normalization, and the third normalization. Okay, so keep in mind with respect to the first normalization, multivariate attributes, second normal form with the partial dependency, third normal form with respect to transient dependency, and the BCN of the functional dependency, and the fourth normal form with respect to the multi-value dependency. Okay, so I hope you understand with respect to the part 2 session. Okay, now next catch up with the next session with respect to the session 6. SQL Server 2022 installation. Okay, so let's get started in the next session. Thank you. Thanks for watching.